नमस्ते प्रिय मित्राणि। पूर्वस्मिन् काले यदा जनाः भिन्न भिन्न ग्रामेभ्यः जनाः मिलन्ति स्म तदा परस्पर प्रश्नः भवति स्म। युष्माकं ग्रामे वृष्टिः वर्षा वा सम्यक् अभवत् किम्? यदि उत्तरम् आम् वर्षा सम्यक् अभवत् इति आसीत् तर्हि ते जानन्ति स्म यत् तस्मिन् ग्रामे सर्वं सुखमयम् अस्ति। यदि ते वदन्ति स्म अस्माकं ग्रामे वृष्टिः वर्षा न अभवत् तदा जनाः अवगच्छन्ति स्म यत् तस्मिन् ग्रामे दुःखम् अस्ति. So dear friends, I just wanted to share that in previous days when people used to live in villages and they came from different villages and met each other, one of the first questions they would ask is whether it had rained well in their villages. And if the answer was yes, it rained well in our village, that implied that the people were happy and there was happiness in the air. And if the answer was that no, in our village it has not rained, then the implications were that the people were unhappy in that village. So evam prashnakaranena स्वग्रामस्य अथवा ग्रामाणां स्वास्थ्यं मानसिक व्यवस्थायाः स्वास्थ्यं च ज्ञातुं शक्नुवन्ति स्म. So with these questions it was possible to gauge the well-being and the condition of the health, of the psychological as well as of the environmental health of that place. तो अहं जानामि बहुषु देशेषु सर्वदा वृष्टिः भवति यथा आयर्लैंड देशे बहु वृष्टिः भवति. अतः अहं प्रश्नं पृच्छामि अन्यत्र सर्वत्र युष्माकं देशेषु वृष्टिः अभवत् किम्? वृष्टिः वर्षा वा सम्यक् अभवत् किम्? So I know that there are some countries like in Ireland where I have friends from where it rains very often. So such questions would not be very relevant in those places. But for the rest of you, it's a question, it's another way of asking how are you? And it was very deeply connected with nature, as you can see. So my questions to you is that I hope everything is well in your places and that it has rained sufficiently for there to be enough food and enough well-being for your people. Besides that, tad vihaya Sanskrita varsha api bhavati kim yushmakam jivane. So besides that, I also would like to know whether there has been enough of Sanskrit rainfall in your lives. And aham asham karomi yat tatra paryapta varsha abhavat iti. And I hope that there has been a sufficient rainfall of the Sanskrit language in your being. Tena manaha shariram sarvam api swastha athava sarvam api swastham bhavati. And if it rains, then if there has been a Sanskrit shower in your beings and there has been enough of it, I'm assured that there is well-being in your mental and physical condition. So with these few words, let's move on to today's lecture, which is lecture number 19. And in our previous lessons, we were looking at the third person pronouns and nouns in the plural, and we had finished looking at that. Here we are going to look at the third person pronouns and nouns in the three genders in the dual form, and this is the part 1 of that. So in this session, we are going to do an introduction to the first and second cases for the masculine, the pullinga or the napunsakalinga words ending with the akara, and then we'll also look at the forms for the strilinga words ending with the a and the e karas. and we're going to look at this in the dvivachanam or the dual forms. Following this, we'll do an understanding of the verb conjugation grid and do a practice of the vartamana or the present tense. And in this context, I would also like to introduce you to the concept of the different groups of verbs. We'll talk about it when we come to that particular slide. And as usual, there is a stress on trying to build your vocabulary. So let's move on. We'll do a little practice. So since we're looking at the first person, the first case and the second case for the third person pronouns and nouns, the question is kaha kim karoti, and in the feminine it is ka kim karoti. But when we are looking just at the masculine, we see that in the dual case it becomes kau kim kurutaha. So kaha kim karoti becomes kau kim kurutaha, and for the feminine ka kim karoti becomes ke kim kurutaha. Alright, you will understand why I have put the masculine and the feminine together in this particular slide. So the answer, saha gayakaha gayati, tau gayakau gayataha. Saha gayati, tau gayataha. Now, do you remember that when we were looking at a set of conversations we had about Sanskrit Bharati and the fact that Piyush was going there with his parents. So, pitarau gamishyataha kim was the question, and the answer was pitarau api gamishyataha. And pitarau, I had told you, was pitacha matacha. Okay, so the father and the mother became pitarau, the couple of the parents. So here we have the same verb ending, tau gayakau gayataha. Saha kridakaha kridati, tau kridakau kridataha. Uttamam. Saha vicharakaha vicharayati, vicharakau vicharayataha. Uttamam. Now let's do it with eshaha. Eshaha randhakaha, cook, randhayati, randhakau randhayataha. Uttamam. Tau randhakau randhayataha. Eshaha nayakaha nayati, tau nayakau nayataha. Uttamam. Eshaha pachakaha pachati, pachakaha pachataha. Uttamam. Now let's just do chitrakaraha chitram karoti, chitrakarau chitram kurutaha. Uttamam. Next, and then patrakaraha patram karoti, patrakarau patram kurutaha. Uttamam. Tantrajnyaha tantram janati, tantrajnyau tantram janitaha. So we've seen with janati that it behaves a little differently. So an opportunity to introduce you to those forms. Shastrajnyaha shastram janati, shastrajnyau shastram janitaha. Uttamam. Now let's move on to the next one here, and what do we find? In the feminine we have sa nartaki nrityati becomes te. So in the feminine it is te, like ke. So here it is te nartakyau. It doesn't become te nartakye. So you have to be alert there. Te nartak. So te. Now, and what else do you recognize with this ke also and the te? So ke was also the question for the masculine plural. You remember? And so you have to be very careful, because te is the English equivalent of they, but in this particular context it signifies the feminine dual. Alright, so te nartakyau. So just like the first for the masculine forms we had janakau or gayakau, here it becomes nartakyau. And nrityataha, nrityati, nrityataha. Sa nati natanam karoti, te natyau natanam kurutaha. Uttamam. Did you get that? Want to say that again? Te natyau natanam kurutaha. Let's move on. Let's do it with esha. So esha janani janma dadati will become ete jana nyau janma dattaha. So janma dattaha. So dadati dattaha plural dadati. Uttamam. We'll study that in another context, the whole of it. But for now, esha abhinetri abhinayam karoti becomes ete abhinetriau abhinayam kurutaha. Now I would just like to reassure you that with Sanskrit there is no requirement to go fast and therefore get anxious. All you need to do is just to stay very quiet, go step by step by step, follow the logic of the language, and you're sure to hit the mark. So all you need to do, so the moment you have a word like you have here nati, and I'm telling you nati dual case, so what will it become? Nati natyau. Alright, so let's do a quick recap of that. Gayakaha gayakau, kridakaha kridakau, vicharakaha vicharakau, randhakaha randhakau, nayakaha nayakau, pachakaha pachakau, chitrakaraha chitrakarau, patrakaraha patrakarau, tantrajnyaha tantrajnyau, shastrajnyaha shastrajnyau. And what happens to the feminine? Sa nartaki te nartakyau. So we had saha gayakaha tau gayakau. Very easy rhyming and all of that. In the feminine, sa nati becomes te natyau. And then you have esha nati is ete natyau. So nati natyau, janani jananyau, abhinetri abhinetriau. Uttamam. So I hope that is clear now. So let's look at what happens to the words ending with a, and here we are going to also look at the feminine and the neuter. So we have the question ka kim karoti becomes, we have already seen that, ke kim kurutaha. What happens in the neuter? Kim kim karoti also becomes ke kim kurutaha. So let's see what happens to the words, and here we have the words ending with the a in the feminine. So sa gayika gayati, what happens? Te gayike gayataha. So gayika becomes gayike. In the previous slide we had looked at nartaki becoming nartakyau, and it was te nartakyau. So there was a little bit of a thinking involved. The good news with the a is that it follows the rhyming pattern. So if it is te, then it will be gayike gayataha. So sa rakshika rakshati, te rakshike rakshataha. Uttamam. Sa vicharika vicharayati, te vicharike vicharayataha. Uttamam. Now let's do it with esha. Esha tantrajnya tantram janati, ete tantrajnye tantram janitaha. Esha shastrajnya shastram janati, ete shastrajnye shastram janitaha. Uttamam. So is that clear now? So there's a rhyming with the a. Remember, it rhymes. Alright. Let's see what happens to the neuter. So tat vimanam shigram gachati, and I have kept the ete in the middle, as you can see here, because it is common to the words ending with the a, and common to the words, or it's common to the feminine gender as well as to the neuter gender. It's not only limited to the a. So when we are talking of the pronouns, the dual form is the same for the genders for the feminine as well as the neuter genders. Let's see what happens with the neuter. We started it. Tat vimanam shighram gachati. Te vimane shighram gachatah. Uttamam. Tat vahanam mandam chalati, goes slowly. Become te vahane mandam gacha or chalatah. Uttamam. Let's do it with etat. Etat mitram sarvada sahayam karoti. Ete mitre sarvada sahayam kurutah. Next, etat nakshatram nishchita margena, on a definite path, gachati. Ete nakshatre nishchita margena gachatah. Uttamam. Let's do a recap on that. So, Gayika, Gayike, Rakshika, Rakshike, Vicharika, Vicharike, Sa Tantrajnya, Te Tantrajne, Sa Shastrajnya, Te Shastrajne, Tat Vimanam, Te Vimane, Tat Vahanam, Te Vahane, Tat Mitram, Te Mitre, Tat Nakshatram, Te Nakshatre. Alright, let me now mix and match it for you. So I suggest you close your eyes and I will just tell you words randomly like that, and let me see if you can remember the logic of the dual case here. So let's start. Gaika, Gaike. Nartaki, Nartakyau. Gayakaha, Gayakau. Mitram, Mitre. Vahanam, Vahane. Tantrajnya, Tantrajne. Tantrajnyaha, Tantrajnyau. Abhinetri, Abhinetryau. Sahodari, Sahodaryau. Nadi, Nadyau. Petika, Petike. Uttamam. So I think with that we have a good understanding of the first case for the dual. Now what I wanted to introduce to you next is the verb grid. So we have seen that we have thus far looked at the first and second persons. We had already looked at the dual for that. The only thing that was remaining to complete this grid of 9 is the Dvivachanam for the Prathama Purusha. So I'm going to explain this grid all over again to you, and I would like you to hold this grid in your mind, because the entire verb conjugation will happen on the basis of this grid, and there are many tips in it. So if you can remember those tips, you will help yourself to learn and remember this language much faster. So kim kim asti atra pashyamaha militva tari prathamam atra vachanani santi. Tari ekavachanam, dvivachanam and bahuvachanam. So we have the numbers, so singular, dual and the plural. And purushaha santi. Sanskrite ke purushaha santi. Prathama purushaha. So who are the different persons involved in the actions? So prathama purusha, which is actually equivalent of the third person in English, and the second person formal, or the madhyama purushaha but sammana sahitam, which is bhavan and bhavati. Then we have the madhyama purusha, or the middle person, which is equivalent to the second person informal, and finally the uttama purusha, or the first person. Alright, so this is the grid, and then like you can do a mix and match of which one you need to talk. So right at the outset there you can see that in order to use a verb, your brain has to do a certain amount of computing, and that computing, believe me, is very healthy to activate the grey cells of your brain matter. So let's see what happens here. So we've seen saha becomes tau in the plural, te. Now why have I marked that te in the brown instead of the green like the rest? Is because that they, that te is equivalent to the English they, and in the English we don't have a dual case. We only have singular and plural. But it helps you to remember that the te gets carried over to the dual when it is in the feminine and the neuter. So the te gets carried over here to the feminine and the neuter forms, And how do you remember the tau? So the tip that I would suggest is that you remember the English two. So the two of them, and in English you have TWO. And just write that out for you. So you have TWO. So what is that two doing? If you have to pronounce it also, it is like a twau. So as you can see, there is a slight similarity with the phonetics of the tau there. Okay, so tau. I'll write that in English. So tau. I will yeah. So let's take that there for now. So tau and the two. So if in doubt, remember that the masculine. So two masculine. Tell yourselves that formula. Two masculine. What about the two? It is similar to the tau. So tau purushau. And we know that the au and the aha and the e are similar. So tau purushau. Feminine they from the plural becomes te. And the e, words ending with e, like sahodari, becomes sahodaryau. So there is the au comes two times with the masculine akara ending and the feminine ikara ending. For the rest, it is the de or te or a sound. Alright. So small tips that can probably help you to retain the forms for the dual case here. So let's see what happens. Saha becomes tau, sa becomes te, tat becomes te, and bhavan becomes bhavantau, bhavati becomes bhavathyau. Fine. Let's move on to the madhyama purusha there. So we have tvam becomes yuvam and aham becomes avam. The vam indicating us, and you, two of you, so yuvam, and us to avam. Alright. In terms of similarities of the sound. And what happens in the plural? So the te gets transferred for the masculine. So you have te, for the feminine taha, because the jaw drop with so many beautiful women there. So taha, so just an imagination that can help you remember. Remember, many beautiful women, there's a jaw drop that happens. So ta, and then you become speechless with the breath leaving you. So ta. All right. And we have for the plural is tani. You have to remember that one. Okay, so tani. Next, plural of bhavan is bhavantaha, and for the feminine is bhavatyaha. All right. What happens to the madhyama purusha or the second person? Yuvam, which is a short yuvam, becomes yuyam. It's almost like so many of you. So yuyam. So the yam stays and it becomes vayam, or in the English, if you want to remember, it's viyam. So viyam. So if you remember vi and yam, so vi yam, you can do different kinds of sound tricks to help you remember. Apply that to the u and you have yam. So just with these certain, I would say, sound tricks and associative tricks, you can basically remember this grid. So let's do an application of that grid with a verb, and the verb that we are choosing here is the vad. So every verb originates from a root verb form, which is the dhatu rupa, and so we have the, or which is the dhatu here. So the dhatu of vaddati is vad. That is the root form. So what happens with vad? So saha, what we are also going to do is we are only going to take the saha to represent the entire group, including the bhavan. Alright, to represent the prathama purusha. Tari kim bhavati? Saha vadati. Saha kim karoti? Saha vadati. Tau vadataha. Te vadanti. Tvam vadasi. Yuvam vadathaha. Yuyam vadatha. Aham vadami. Avam vadavaha. Vayam vadamaha. So the root form vad acquires these different suffixes. It's important for you as learners of Sanskrit to know that there is a software of the language and there is a hardware of the language. The software of the language is this user interface where the root vad becomes vadati, vadataha, vadanti. The hardware of the language, which is coded in Panini's Ashtadhyayi grammar text, will tell you about how did the root vad arrive at vadati. And it's a complete series of logic where you say if vad is third person, singular, plural, then the suffix ting will become ti finally. So ting is the root suffix, and with all these different rules, formulae that will come in, the ting will become ti. But for the software of it, what is important for us to remember is there is a very easy manner to memorize the Vartamana Kala forms for the verbs, and the verbs can be subdivided into two, or can be categorized in two groups of verbs, namely the Parasmai Padi, So Parasmai really means Parasmai. I'll write that for you in Parasmai Padi. So Parasmai Padi means for the other. So actions directed towards others largely. There's a little more philosophy involved in that, but very largely that is one kind of a classification. And the other one is Atma Nepadi, which is the second kind. Atma Nepadi, second kind. And you have the third category of verbs, which are Ubhaya Padi. Ubhaya means both, so they can Ubhaya Padi. So that's the third classification in a sense, two large ones, and Ubhaya Padi means they can be done in both ways. So you can have Parasmai Padi forms as well as Atmanepadi forms for a certain group of dhatus or dhatu rupas. Okay, so here we have Parasmai Padi action towards others, Atmanepadi actions directed towards the self, and Ubhaya Padi, it can be in both directions. So what we are learning here is within the Parasmai Padi forms of the verbs. So that's the verb conjugations around Parasmai or in the Parasmai, for the Parasmai Padi groups. Alright, so we have Vadati, and the tip that I was giving you to remember these for the present tenses: Ti, Taha, Nti, Si, Thaha, Tha, Ami, Avaha, Amaha. Say that: Ti, Taha, Nti, Si, Thaha, Tha, Ami, Avaha, Amaha. And why is there this white L there? Because you have the Visarga in each of these. So you remember that the middle one is an L where there will be Visargas. How else can you remember the other remaining of them? Ti, drop the E, put the Visarga Taha, and in Ti you add the numbers, it becomes Nti. Si, you see, so you see can be one way of remembering. Thaha, so Ta with an extra, because there are two of the two of you, it becomes Thaha. That's a trick to try and remember. And Tha without Visarga. Then Mi for I doing the action, me. Then two of us, Avaha, and Amaha for the plural. So you need memorization with Sanskrit. There's no other way out on that. So let's try and just say the verb by itself. Vadati, vadataha, vadanti, vadasi, vadathaha, vadatha, vadami, vadavaha, vadamaha. And so ti, taha, anti, si, thaha, tha, ami, avaha, amaha. Astu. See if you can remember that. Uttamam. Now, like we talked of the different classification of the verb conjugations, in Sanskrit you also have 10 kinds of verbs, so 10 groups of verbs known as Ganaha. So Dasha Ganaha, and in those Ganaha the first one is known as Bhuadi Ganaha. And again there is a hardware that tells you why does the root Bhu become Bhavati. There is something that the that gets added. There is an extra, but that's part of the hardware which we will not enter at this stage. All you need to know that the verb Bhavati comes from the root Bhu, and that is representative of the first group known as the Bhuadi Ganaha. So I'll just write that for you, that is also the first group there. Alright, or I can even write it for you there. That's the first group of verbs. Astu. And now let's see what happens here. So let's take any other. So bhu becomes bhavati, pat becomes pathati, gam becomes gachati. So we've been looking at gachati, but it's important to know that the root is gam. Tishtati comes from the root stha. Pashyati, drish. So let's do the other way. Bhu bhavati, pat pathati, gam gachati, stha tishtati, and drish becomes pashyati. So the last two, as you can see, there is not a lot of similarity between the root form and the conjugated form, but that's because of the hardware. Yet as you go down the other words in this group, in its conjugation in other tenses, the root will come back, as we will see in the cases that will follow in our next lessons. So for now, let's take another verb, which is tishtati, stha. So if the root is tha, it will become tishtati. Let's conjugate it. Tishtati, tishtataha, tishtanti, tishtasi, tishtataha, tishtatha, tishtami, tishtavaha, tishtamaha. Uttamam. And another very important verb that is like a base verb is as. As comes from the second group, which is of the adadi. It's also known as the adadi ganaha. Adadi ganaha. And it is, the root form there is at. And it has different verb forms, but what we are interested in is in the root verb as, because that's a frequently used one. And let's see what happens. Asti, staha, santi. Assi, sthaha, stha, asmi, swaha, smaha. Now I'd like you to try and memorize this, it's very important, but I would also like to remind you that because the verbs are so specific to the pronouns they are associated with, that it suffices just to tell the verb form. Just the conjugated form is enough. We need not reiterate the pronoun in these contexts. Like we can just say asmi. You don't need to necessarily say aham asmi. And just that reduces or makes the language much more brief and concise in its expression. So please remember that asti is a very important verb and you would need to practice it. So let's see what happens in the second case here. We have kam becomes kau, kam and kim become ke. Uttamam. That sounds familiar? Yes. So it is identical to the first case. And how do we also know that? We have seen in the past with the first and second persons that in the dual case, the first and the second cases are the same. So it just suffices to remember one of them and you know the application in the other. So let's look at the word prastavaha, which means offer or proposal. Offer or proposal. Okay, so we have prastavam. In this dual becomes aham prastavam pashyami. I see the proposal. In two of them, aham prastavau pashyami. Okay, so I will skip the verb now and just stick to the form. So mahotsava is a combination of maha utsava. Put it together, there's a sandhi that forms. It is mahotsava. So the O here is indicative of that sandhi and it means a grand festival. So mahotsavam pashyami, mahotsavau pashyami. Sakhim becomes sakhyau, like the first case. So sakhi is a girlfriend or a female friend. Then kumari becomes kumaryau, means a young girl. Patrika, magazine. So patrika becomes patrike. Puja, worship becomes puje. Nrityam, dance, nritye. Nayanam is one eye, two of them, nayane. I'll write that for you. Alright, now what you notice is that I haven't done any color coding for the first and third columns, and that's because I would like to see, it's a game, and I'd like you to try and figure out the relationship between the pronouns and their conjugated verbs. So what I just do to help you is I'm going to just number them to see if we have all of them. So ekam, dve, trini, chatvari, pancha, shat, sapta, ashta, ashta and nava. So the grid of 9, and let's see the corresponding forms here. So avam, first find the verb, avam pashyavaha, uttamam. So avam kim pashyavaha? Prastavau pashyavaha. Tvam pashyasi, uttamam. So kim pashyasi? Mahotsavau pashyasi. You can choose any of them. I'm doing it randomly now. I'm like sticking to the order there. All right. Tau kim pashya taha, uttamam. So it's down there. Next, vayam kim or vayam, and then what will be the verb? Pashyamaha, uttamam. So vayam kim pashyama? Let's take patrika, patrike pashyamaha. Yuvam will be with vaha. Why? Because there's a vam there. So yuvam, not the vaha there, yuvam will be with the thaha. I hope you were awake and didn't get carried away with my slip of tongue. So yuvam pashyathaha. Kim pashyathaha? Kumari. Kumaryau pashyathaha. Uttamam. Saha. Very easy. Where is it now? Pashyati. Kim pashyati? Nrityam. Dual. Nritye pashyati. Yuyam. Verb corresponding, there isn't much left. Yes. Pashyanti, no. Pashyami, no. Pashyatha, uttamam. So yuyam pashyatha. Kim pashyatha? Nayanam, nayane. So you're seeing the two eyes there, whatever. So next, te. Yes, that's easy now. Pashyanti. Kim pashyanti? Let's say mahotsava. Mahotsavau pashyanti. Uttamam. The last one. Pashyami. Aham kim pashyami? I'll make the sentence for you. Let me see if you can translate. I am seeing the two female friends and the two dances. So aham pashyami, kim pashyami, two female friends, sakhyau and the dancers, nritye cha pashyami. Uttamam. Let's move on to do a quick recap of what we have done thus far, and we see that kaha and ka for the feminine here, but it becomes kau, kau, etau, etau, and ka becomes ke, ete, ete. For the masculine it was janakau, and for the second is janakau, and for the sahodari, sahodaryau, sahodaryau. So we see that it's the same there. And let's move on to the words ending with a and the neuter words. So we have in both cases the ke. So ke ambe, ete ambe, ke mitre, ete mitre. And in the dual, in the second case, so ke, ete, ambe and mitre. Uttamam. So we have the first and second cases that are identical, and that will be half your work in terms of memorizations. So let's do an application of what we've learnt in a verse. We have another verse from the Gita, which is from the 3rd chapter, and it's the 34th verse there. It says, Indriyasyendriyasyarthe ragadveshau vyavasthitau tayor na vasham agachet tau hyasya paripanthinau. So I'll just translate that for you. In the object of this or that sense, indriyasya, indriyasyarthe. So indriyasya plus indriyasyarthe, here indriyasya this place. It breaks here. It becomes a Sya plus Indra. At that point, it becomes an A. So this becomes a Sye. That's a Sandhi, another Sandhi rule there. So this becomes a Sye, as you can see. Indriyasya arthe. There's another one that happens here, which is a Sya plus an A, and it becomes a Sya. Syarthe, as you can see there. So I will just mark that for you there. Indriyasyarthe raga dveshau. So raga cha dvesha cha, the two of them together. So that's liking and disliking. Raga, liking, disliking, dvesha, the two of them. Vyavasthitau are set in ambush. So they take over our being there. When? Tayor na vashe. Tayor na, we are yet to see that form, but this is the sixth case. So tayor na, there is a visarga. Tayoho plus na becomes tayor na. Vasham agachat agachet. So we've got a few things happening there. Vasham, so you can cut that into half. Vasham, so that's a vasham. Agachet, so that's a ma plus agachet. Agachet. So agachet, I will write that for you. Agachet plus tau. So you should not come under their control, fall not into their power. So there is tayor, fall not into their power. Tau hyasya paripanthina, for they are besetters of the soul in its path. So they here is tau, and it's in the first case here. First case, dual. Okay, hyasya paripanthinau, again you find that it is the first and the dual. Alright, so now let's see if we can chant that out. So you repeat after me. Indriyasyendriyasyarthe ragadveshau vyavasthitau tayor navashamagachet tau hyasya paripanthinau. I just wanted to mention that the agachet is another kind of a verb conjugation that we haven't looked at, but it basically means it's like a kind of an order request that says don't fall prey. In this case, don't become prey to that. All right, so with this verse, as you can see that Krishna is trying to lead Arjuna to go beyond likes and dislikes, and he's saying those are what traps the soul and makes the soul confused. So we have Srimati Sushma Swaraj, who was the former External Affairs Minister of India, and we just lost her very recently, but she was a great lover of Sanskrit and made speeches in Sanskrit during the Sanskrit World Conference also. So this is a beautiful quotation by her where she says that the Gita was a great source of strength. She says, I was able to face the challenges as External Affairs Minister only because of the Bhagavad Gita. Gita has answers to everybody's problems, and that's why I said it while standing in the parliament that everyone should read 2 shlokas of Gita every day. This question can be regarded as a communal question, etc., etc. But we find, as we have been looking at quotations from different eminent personalities across the world, we see that the content of the Gita has the power to surpass all kinds of religious, narrow sectarian identities and offer a universal solace to anybody who is in a mode of dejection and depression, and really provide solutions to understand, have clarity of mind, and face different conflicts of life with confidence and with clarity. Some references there. Swastyastu. Swastyastu is the greeting of the Balinese people, that's people from the island of Bali in Indonesia, and they always greet you with swastyastu, and if you break it up, it is composed of swasti astu, su asti, well-being, astu, may you have. So may you have well-being, swastyastu, swastyastu, until our next meeting.